Headliner Nation, we talked about a ton of players this offseason, ranging from guys we absolutely wanted to draft, some guys that were under the radar, we felt like the general public was sleeping on them, and then of course some players that we didn't want anything to do with. And through 3 weeks of the NFL season, how correct were we? Are we willing to just say, oh man, we were absolutely wrong on this guy right now? No. Are we willing to victory lap a lot of these guys quite yet? Probably not. We're still very early in the season and a lot of things can change. So for today's video, I'm going to go through the top 50 players that Jake and I discussed in videos, in Discord, whether it be in our draft guide, any content anywhere this summer, the top 50 of them. We're going to talk about how the season has started so far and my concern on whether or not that trend will continue. I can tell you that there's a few guys that we absolutely nailed. There's also a few guys that we are probably wrong about, but we're going to go through it all right now, and we are going to start at the quarterback position. Let's start off with Drake May. I was a big fan of him as a sleeper this offseason, mostly for the fact that we could have seen some upside from him because he was running the football on the ground last year, and I expected that to continue this season. Being drafted as the QB 16, and he's the QB 6 right now. We've already seen an improvement through the air. He's still using his legs, and right now, my concern risk for him is only a 2. I do think he, for the most part, keeps up what he's doing right now. Hopefully, we see him get a little bit better through the air because he needs to not throw nearly as many interceptions. I definitely thought that Jordan Love had an opportunity to step back to where he was a couple of years ago in terms of his fantasy production. And so far throughout this season, he's had a pretty solid floor. Week 1 and week 2, very solid floors. Week 3, had some trouble with Cleveland, but you drafted him as the QB 17, and he's currently the QB 14, so still a decent return on your draft pick. He's got a good schedule for the rest of the season. He's going to be facing some teams that he'll still have a solid floor against, but he's also got some teams coming up he could definitely have a better ceiling. Right now, my concern meter is at a 2 with him. I think he's going to be right around this area. QB 12 is exactly where I thought he would be around with a solid floor and some upside weeks, and he still has that potential. Dak Prescott could end up being a little bit of a bigger issue. Drafted as the QB 11, he's all the way down at QB 18 right now. Did not have a great start to the season, had a good week 2, and then lost CeeDee Lamb in week 3. And that's the biggest concern for him, and that's why I've got him up at a 3 right now, because his best weapon is going to be out for who knows. It might just be this week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 4 weeks. The Dallas Cowboys haven't exactly given us great insight into how long CeeDee Lamb may end up missing for. So we'll continue to eye it. If it's 1 week without CeeDee Lamb, then this is probably more like a 2 for me. But if it's multiple weeks, it's going to stay right here at a 3. I was all aboard the Atlanta stacks this offseason, and unfortunately, Michael Penix just has not played nearly as well as he did at the end of last year. And he's already had a game where he was replaced by Kirk Cousins. That's why my concern meter for him is all the way up at a 4. Now, does that mean that Drake London and Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts are just going to disappear? No, I don't think that. But Michael Penix clearly does not have the floor that we saw at the end of the 2024 season. He was being drafted as the QB 24. He's down at QB 27 right now. And unfortunately, we haven't seen anything that really makes me feel like he's going to take a big jump. JJ McCarthy is probably still out at least another couple of weeks. But if Carson Wentz keeps playing the way he is right now, JJ McCarthy may not go back to the starter anytime soon. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is at the NFL level, especially with a team that has aspirations of not only going to the playoffs, but making a deep run this year as well. JJ McCarthy, he was drafted as the QB 19. He's all the way back at QB 31 right now. And outside of 1 quarter this season, he really hasn't been all that great. Unfortunately, the offensive line hasn't helped him out all that much, but as of right now, the concern isn't the offensive line or how JJ McCarthy's playing. The concern is the fact, when will he be back and does he return to a starting job? If you've been following us for a while, you know that we want to find value at the quarterback position. We don't want to have to use a pick in the first 5 rounds on a quarterback when we could be loading up on running backs and wide receivers. This year, kind of the first guy where I was like, hey, this is where the cutoff is for me, was Bo Nix. If you wanted somebody with some elite upside, but you didn't want to wait too much longer, Bo Nix was really that first quarterback where I was like, okay, this is where I would be okay with you going at this point. He was drafted as the QB 8. He's all the way back at QB 20 right now. And unfortunately, he hasn't really had a whole lot of upside so far. Only one game where he's thrown for over 200 yards, and it was only 206. He isn't really using his legs all that much right now either. He did run for 33 yards in week 3, which is good, but last season, it just felt like he was using his legs a little bit more, especially in the red zone when he was bringing in some rushing touchdowns. My concern meter is only at a 2 with Bo Nix, however. It is still a very good offense. Hopefully when Evan Ingram comes back and healthy, which we'll talk about later, Bo Nix will see a little bit more upside and he can be a little bit more successful with his ceiling this year. As we love to call him around here, Justin Herbert when we're feeling fancy. But Justin Herbert was a guy that I thought could take another step this year. And I talked about it in a few different videos that, hey, Justin Herbert could end up taking a step forward and be a quarterback that is going to put up some pretty decent numbers and not just let the run game dictate exactly what they do. And so far this season, that is exactly what we have seen from him. It doesn't matter who they're facing. Are they still going to run the football? Absolutely. But Justin Herbert isn't scared. He's going out there and he's slinging it. And his wide receiver weapons are playing really well right now. 2 of which we'll talk about when we get to wide receivers. But for right now, my concern is a 1 with Justin Herbert. I think he continues to put up these numbers. He was drafted as the QB 14. He is going as the QB 6 in fantasy right now. How about the duo from Detroit to kick off the running back position, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs? Jake and I both talked about Jahmyr Gibbs this offseason. We told you all, if you don't want Jamar Chase at number 1, and if Saquon Barkley, you have concerns about him, you think that he's not going to get the workload or he's going to regress a little bit, you want to take a shot at upside, then it's Jahmyr Gibbs, and so far he's returned that value. After being drafted as the RB3 this offseason, he's at the RB5 spot. David Montgomery has even been a little bit more impressive so far. Again, a down week 1 against Green Bay, a very good defense against the run. The last 2 weeks, he's been really solid, especially against Baltimore last week. The main concern with David Montgomery was running the ball up the middle, but Tate Ratledge, Graham Glasgow, Mahogany, these guys right up front in the middle of this Detroit line are playing very well after looking a little bit scattered in week 1. They're gelling together very well right now. They're getting a great push, just like we saw in Baltimore this past week. David Montgomery was drafted as the RB23. He's the RB8 right now. Does he keep that upside? Probably not. I still think his upside is high-end RB2. But my concern for both of these guys is at a 1 because the offensive line looks way better than anyone would have anticipated at this point. They throw the ball very well still, and both of these guys will continue to get volume on the ground. There was a couple of guys that my dynamic running back rating pinged as being breakout potential players this year, and one of them was Trey Benson, being drafted as the RB50 right now through week 3. It does not include his performance from Thursday Night Football. He is the RB35. And with James Conner done for the season, we now are going to get a look at Trey Benson. Now, I saw a couple of concerns about exactly how he was utilized. And during a couple of the most important drives of the game, Trey Benson really wasn't out there. And yeah, Emari Demercado getting a lot of work in the passing game isn't exactly something you want to be super thrilled about. But I don't think Trey Benson is all of a sudden going to get 25 touches a game in his first week as the starter. He'll continue to be the guy, and he still looks solid on the ground. He had 8 carries for 35 yards, averaging 4.4 yards per carry. He still had 5 targets in the passing game, and he caught all 5 of those targets. He gets Tennessee, Indianapolis coming up here very soon. Green Bay before the bye, that will be a little bit more difficult. But as long as he continues to be out there as the main back, he's going to get touches, and hopefully this offense can play in front a little bit and not as behind as much as they did on Thursday Night Football. Right now, my concern for him is a 2. I don't really think I need to go to a 3 at this point. Last week was his first week as a starter. I still think he's going to end up being the main guy. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. Jake and I were a little bit more split on this one. Jake really loved Aaron Jones. I really loved Jordan Mason. And Aaron Jones looked solid in week 1, but unfortunately was injured in week 2. So really, his grade at this point, it has to be incomplete. He's going to come back and he's going to end up making an impact. But Jordan Mason, this is why I was on Jordan Mason, and that was because of the injury potential to Aaron Jones. And now that Aaron Jones is injured, Jordan Mason has a shot to continue to put up some fantastic numbers. He looked great in week 3. He's going to look good until Aaron Jones comes back, and he's going to get a solid amount of volume. Aaron Jones was drafted as the RB26. Because of the injury, he's down to RB43 right now. So we'll give him a pass on that one. Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason was right behind him. Jordan Mason was at RB31. Right now, he's the RB19. My concern for these guys is a 2 because Jordan Mason is going to continue to be utilized. He was already being utilized before Aaron Jones was injured. Aaron Jones will be back at some point in time, and he'll be a guy that's going to help in the passing game still. So we're only going to go with a 2 with these guys because I think they both can still be used at any point this season. I know we're not thrilled with Bucky Irving right now, but he's still the RB16 after being drafted as the RB8. So I'm going to give him a pass right now because he has had injuries galore on the offensive line. The good news is Tristan Wirfs should be back here very soon, which will be a huge upgrade for them. Bucky Irving, to me at this point, I'm not really panicking. He's only a 2 for me right now. We're going to be getting Wirfs back, and he's still seeing way more time on the field than Rachaad White. Yeah, White got a touchdown in week 2 that we wish would have went to Bucky Irving, but Irving had a couple of fantastic plays in the passing game, and he was just gassed. They went to White at the goal line. Bucky Irving is still going to see plenty of volume. Bijan Robinson was another guy that we were like, hey, if you want to draft him over Saquon Barkley, we are all for it. And I don't have much to say about him right now. He's a 1 on the concern meter. He was drafted as the RB2. He's the RB4 right now. Even with Michael Penix not looking great to start the year, Bijan Robinson still producing. Jaden Blue hasn't even been in a game yet this season. He has been a healthy scratch. Javonte Williams is the guy. And I mentioned him in a couple of videos very early on. And then when they drafted Jaden Blue, I was like, yeah, Jaden Blue could make an impact, but I don't think he's going to step in and take the role away from Javonte Williams. Williams is going to be the guy to start. And Blue isn't even active right now. And they were close. At one point in time, Jaden Blue was being drafted over Javonte Williams. Jaden Blue was the RB44, and right now, Javonte Williams is the RB6. I'm going to list him as a 1. He's seeing a ton of volume on the ground and through the air, and I expect him to continue to see that type of volume as long as he doesn't get hurt. Another backfield duo that we called correctly. Jake and I both were in agreement. J.K. Dobbins was a late round sleeper. We also both think R.J. Harvey could be very good, but it wasn't going to be with J.K. Dobbins right away. And at the beginning of the preseason, it was pretty clear that J.K. Dobbins was going to be the starter. So we leaned into that. Anybody doing drafts at that point, get J.K. Dobbins late. Do not draft R.J. Harvey nearly as high as what you are right now. And so far, so good. RB37, that's where Dobbins was drafted at. R.J. Harvey was at RB21. And right now, J.K. Dobbins is the RB10. R.J. Harvey is the RB48. I do have a concern at 2 right now for this tandem because J.K. Dobbins obviously has dealt with a lot of injuries in the past. And if he goes down, R.J. Harvey is going to get a ton of work. And that's where you could be really excited about the investment there. But until that investment kicks in, you're going to be putting him on your bench, and hopefully you have enough room to just hold on to him. Kyren Williams was drafted as the RB12, and we talked about it. Hey, touchdown potential, still going to be the guy, lots of volume. He's being overlooked in the 3rd round. He's the RB13 right now. So he's basically returning the value that you drafted him at, and it's still early. My concern for him is a 2, and it's just because Blake Corum is ultra efficient right now in the little amount of touches he's getting, but Kyren Williams still is getting the majority of the touches. And yeah, Blake Corum stole a touchdown this season, but it's not going to happen all the time. Kyren Williams is going to even end up bumping up a little bit. I could see him back into the top probably 10 here in the next few weeks. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Now, I'm not willing to say that I was wrong about this backfield as of yet because I don't think I was. It's only been technically 4 weeks for them because they played Thursday Night Football. But, Kenneth Walker wasn't 100%. And because of that, he was slowly worked back into it in week 1. And then Zach Charbonnet ends up getting hurt, and Kenneth Walker goes off in week 2. And then in week 3, with no Zach Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker doesn't look great, but he scores a couple of touchdowns. And then in week 4, Zach Charbonnet steals a touchdown because Kenneth Walker gets a stupid penalty. Zach Charbonnet is in there instead. He scores. Walker still looks fantastic on the ground. He broke a couple of big runs. He unfortunately got stuffed behind the line of scrimmage for a pretty big loss a couple of different times, or his numbers would have looked a lot better. But even on Thursday Night Football, Kenneth Walker went for over 100 total yards. So right now, Kenneth Walker, for me, along with Zach Charbonnet, is at a 3 in terms of risk, because for my concern, I think we still see a little bit of back and forth, something that we don't want to see. But through the first 3 weeks, you invested in Kenneth Walker as the RB17. He's the RB15 right now. You invested in Zach Charbonnet as his backup at RB33. He's RB53 because he missed a game. Both of those numbers will fluctuate a little bit because they don't include Thursday Night Football. I'm not worried about Josh Jacobs at all. He was in a must-have running back video for me. I'm still into Josh Jacobs being a top 12 running back this season. You drafted him at RB7 and he's currently RB18. Last year, Josh Jacobs, through the first 4 weeks of the season, he was all the way back at the RB20 spot. He ended up being just fine. So he's already ahead of the game from last year. Jaylen Warren, another guy that Jake and I both agreed on. Jake put him in a late round sleeper video. I had him as a breakout candidate based on the dynamic running back rating. And so far, he's getting a decent amount of volume to begin the year. You drafted him as RB30. He's up to RB17 right now. Unfortunately, I am going to put his concern meter at a 3, and it's not necessarily about Jaylen Warren, but it's more about Arthur Smith. Jaylen Warren is out there way more than Kenneth Gainwell. Kenneth Gainwell is still seeing time on the field. My biggest question is Caleb Johnson, and how much does he end up growing from the start of the season till the end of the season? Because if they see him getting better week to week to week in practice, you might start seeing him out on the field a little bit more. But he is in the doghouse right now, so no need to currently worry. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Tony Pollard. He was drafted as the RB25. He's currently the RB24. It's what I said about Tony Pollard over and over and over. If you draft him, you're getting a low-end RB2 that you can start in your flex consistently. My concern with him right now, it's a 1. He'll be just fine. He's going to give you these numbers all year. I got a couple of guys that we were totally wrong on. Alvin Kamara will be the first one. Jake and I were like, man, this is a guy that's going to get a ton of passing work in this offense. Outside Chris Olave, who's really going to be the guy to step up? Spencer Rattler isn't even looking Alvin Kamara's way. He's got 2 targets in 2 separate games throughout the first 3 weeks. That is not going to get it done. This is a guy that we thought could see 5+ targets a week. Maybe the Juwan Johnson breakout has something to do with it, but Alvin Kamara, his concern right now is at a 4. Because if he doesn't start getting 5+ targets very, very soon, people are not going to love what they are getting from him. Now, he had a very solid week 2, which puts him up at RB22 right now after being drafted as the RB15. But we need to get him some work in the air, and we need to get it quickly. I can already tell you that my biggest miss of the offseason is Tank Bigsby, and it's already a miss. I completely misread the coach speak from that backfield there, because I essentially believe what happened was there was talk early on that Travis Etienne was going to be on the trading block. And then nothing happened with him. And then towards the end of training camp, all of a sudden it was like, well, Tank Bigsby is going to be on the trading block. What I believe was happening is that Jacksonville was trying to trade one of those running backs, and neither of them had any value until Tank Bigsby had some value to the Philadelphia Eagles. And because of that, the Eagles traded for him. He's now the backup there. He's currently the RB88 after being drafted as the RB34. The concern meter is obviously a 4. If something happens to Saquon Barkley, Tank Bigsby may end up being one of the most added players in fantasy this year. But if nothing happens to Saquon Barkley, then Tank Bigsby is just going to be an afterthought all year long. The good news is you probably didn't waste a pick on him because he was drafted so late. Quinshon Judkins had an up and down year, and Jake and I both agreed that we really like this landing spot. And then Jake put him in the draft guide as one of those breakout potential players this season. And we were definitely worried when all of a sudden Quinshon Judkins found himself in some big legal trouble, and we had to cool on him immediately because we didn't know what it meant. A suspension could still be coming at some point this year, but he's back on the field and he looks fantastic. Even that game against Green Bay last week, who's been really good to start the year against running backs, Judkins did a solid job. Right now, his concern meter is a 2. It's probably a little bit closer to a 3 just because I don't know if there is going to be a suspension this year, but he was drafted as the RB35, and even after missing week 1, he's all the way up to RB30 already. Chase Brown. I talked about him a few different times this offseason, and it wasn't that I didn't like Chase Brown, it was that I didn't like where he was being drafted, because this was a guy that was being drafted as the RB11. He was into the second round at times, into the second round, early third round. That was a little too spicy for me. I wanted to get him another round later. The reason Chase Brown was so good last year was because he was such a value on draft day. This year, that completely changed. Now that he's being drafted as a top 12 running back, expectations are way higher. And after being drafted as the RB11, he's the RB31 right now. I did not want him at his ADP. And right now, if you drafted him at his ADP, you are hating the investment. My concern is a 3 because he has looked terrible so far this season. Is it all his fault? No, it's not entirely his fault. Whether it be offensive line play, whether it be the fact that Joe Burrow is now out for the rest of the regular season, there's a lot of concerns about Chase Brown. That's why he's all the way up at a 3 on the concern level right now. You could technically say he's a 4. DeAndre Swift was more towards a guy that Jake really liked this season. I didn't mind him, but I also was like, I don't know if him and Ben Johnson are truly going to work out together that well. So I was skeptical. And as of right now, he's basically giving you value. Like, he hasn't been a hit. He hasn't been a miss. You drafted him as the RB22. He's currently ranked the RB23. So you probably got about what his value currently shows. So he hasn't been a missed pick at all at this point. My concern level of him is going to be a 3, though, because I do think he hasn't been as good as he could have been so far this year. And I do think with the way this offense performed up until the Dallas game, I could see them starting to move some pieces around. And with DeAndre Swift, he's a guy that I think could be one of the first ones that it's like, hey, this isn't working out. We're going to move away from him, and we're going to start doing some different things in the backfield. So I don't think DeAndre Swift is safe by any means. I definitely think in good matchups, he could be solid and we play him. In bad matchups, we might look to somebody with some better ceiling. Yeah, I don't know why anybody was drafting Joe Mixon this offseason. It made no sense whatsoever. I did a YouTube short called The Most WTF Picks in Fantasy Football, and Joe Mixon was in there. The guy might not even play this year. Any update we've had from them is nothing but concern about his injury, and there's really no status on when he could end up returning. And he was being drafted as the RB29. Right now, if you drafted him as the RB29, you probably picked him up as your RB2 or your RB3, and the best that he's going to do anytime soon is he's going to handle your IR spot. All right, let's move on to wide receivers. But before that, we need to make a quick change. I'll be right back. Way better. Nope, something's still wrong. There we go. Now we are ready to talk about wide receivers, but I needed to get a little bit more comfortable. And, this video comes out on Saturday, and I missed this week's live show Friday night. I planned a concert with my daughter all the way back in February of this year before we decided to move to Friday nights. So her and I were enjoying that concert. But let's put our live stream hat on and really lock in to talk about wide receivers. But the reason we're looking so good right now is because of our friends over at Chubbies. And we're helping Chubbies kick off their new NFL line, and these shirts are incredible. I wear this thing all of the time, whether it's chilling at the house, whether it's going out. I wore it at the pool a couple of times when they sent us this stuff over the summer. I love this shirt. I've even wore it on the golf course. It is super comfortable, and I get to rep my Detroit Lions just like you can rep your favorite NFL team as well. And right now, we're helping them kick off their NFL line, so you might as well go on over, support Chubbies and the Headliners by using code Headliners at checkout to get $10 off of your order. And these are the type of shirts that once you order them, you will never regret it. And I definitely think this is a good transition because there were some wide receivers that I had a chubby for this offseason, and people kind of looked at me like I was crazy. What about Rome Odunze? I included him in a sleeper video this offseason, and I talked about not just the big play potential, but the touchdown potential as well. And if you invested in him at wide receiver 37, he's currently the wide receiver 3. My concern meter right now for him is a 1. He's clearly the wide receiver 1 in Chicago. Caleb Williams is looking his way, and Ben Johnson is scheming him. Let's talk Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston, because Quentin Johnston was also in a sleeper video this offseason. In fact, he was in the same sleeper video as Rome Odunze. And the amount of comments on that video telling me how insane I was to even suggest Quentin Johnston as a sleeper, it had to be 50, 60, 70 comments, which on an offseason video is quite a bit of comments with people disagreeing. But I was like, just give it a shot. Let's see what happens. The touchdown potential is there. Maybe he figured out the drop issues, and maybe he's still having drop issues, but he is a guy in that offense right now. He is all the way up at wide receiver 5 after being drafted as the wide receiver 79. But on the backside of that, it's the concern that we had about Ladd McConkey. When Keenan Allen joined the mix, we were like, ugh. This could be bad news for Ladd McConkey. And based on where he's going as the wide receiver 11, I do not want him as my wide receiver 1. If you draft him as your wide receiver 2, okay, but make sure you have another backup plan just in case. And that even hasn't been good enough at this point because Ladd McConkey is at wide receiver 49 right now. My concern level with both of these guys is going to be at a 2 because could Ladd McConkey end up potentially coming back at some point in time? Absolutely. Quentin Johnston has had issues staying healthy. Keenan Allen is not a spring chicken anymore. He could face an injury at some point in time. And as soon as one of those things happen, Ladd McConkey is going to end up being just fine. My concern level for Quentin Johnston is also going to be a 2 right now because he's played fantastic to begin the year. That could really drop off at any point in time. And even if it does drop off, that's fine. He's wide receiver 5 right now. He could still be a wide receiver 2 the rest of the way, and it's still a very good return on your value. Chris Olave is another guy that I got a ton of sideways glances at, especially because I put him in my must-have wide receiver video. And I was like, Kyle, what are you thinking saying Chris Olave is a must-have wide receiver? And I was like, hey, listen, this is a guy that has been drafted as a 3rd or 4th round draft pick for the last couple of years. He's got a ton of talent. He's being drafted all the way back at wide receiver 34 now. Why not take a shot on him? He's wide receiver 32. So he's right around where we were drafting him at, but the targets tell a different story. Yeah, Chris Olave is probably on your bench as depth right now. You're probably not starting him all that often because the fantasy points don't look that great. But you know the other side to this story? Right now, he leads the NFL in targets at 36. He has one more target than Puka Nacua. Jackson Smith-Njigba is 3rd with 33 targets, and he has one extra game than Chris Olave right now. This dude is seeing over 10 targets a game. Worst case scenario for Chris Olave, you're going to keep him on your bench when you have buys or if you're dealing with injuries. You'll throw him in there and he's going to give you okay numbers with some decent potential because of the amount of volume. If we can start getting him over 50 receiving yards a game though, Chris Olave could start climbing and climbing fast. Tyreek Hill ended up sneaking his way up to wide receiver 12, and Jake and I both agreed that in the third round, it's really not that big of a risk because if he doesn't end up working out all that much, you didn't draft him as your wide receiver 1, or if you did, you probably still have a solid wide receiver 2 behind him. And so far, he's been the wide receiver 22 after being drafted as the wide receiver 12. My risk concern from him, it's going to be a 3 because obviously, this offense is not what it used to be. Tua does not look like the quarterback that he used to be. Tyreek Hill might be losing a step as well. And he hasn't been awful. He has a touchdown. He has a 100-yard game over the last couple of weeks here. So he's giving you some decent fantasy value. He just doesn't have the ceiling that he used to. Could he at some point in time? Absolutely he could. But as of right now, he's a safe bet to plug in as your wide receiver 2. DK Metcalf and Calvin Austin. DK Metcalf showed up in a couple of videos for me. Calvin Austin showed up in a couple of videos for Jake. And as of right now, the value definitely leans towards Calvin Austin a little bit more. He's been solid to begin the year. After being drafted as the wide receiver 102, he's the wide receiver 29 right now. For DK Metcalf, he's a few spots behind. Wide receiver 20 was his draft spot. Wide receiver 26 is where he's currently at. We'd like to see both of them get a little bit more volume. DK Metcalf to begin the year, he's been okay. Right now, my concern for both of these guys is at a 2. Can Calvin Austin keep it up? Probably. I don't see why he can't be a wide receiver 3, especially with the way Aaron Rodgers looks at him. DK Metcalf, we would like him to go a little bit higher, absolutely, and I still think that he can get there. He is a guy that we talked about being drafted as a wide receiver 2 anyway, so if he can have a couple of solid weeks coming up, he's going to be right in that conversation of where we had him anyway. Yeah, Jake and I didn't nail Calvin Ridley on the head through 3 weeks so far, and that could end up being a guy that we are completely wrong on, but if you listen to the fantasy headliners all offseason long, if you purchased our draft guide, you heard me talking about Alec Iomanner probably more than anybody else at the beginning of the year. Iomanner, I've heard it both ways at this point. I'm going to call him Alec Ao moving forward, and that's going to be the dude's nickname, just like some of the other nicknames we have given to players here at the Fantasy Headliners. But to begin the season, Calvin Ridley was being drafted as the wide receiver 29. Alec Ao was being drafted as the wide receiver 75. They have switched at this point because right now Alec Ao is the wide receiver 33, Calvin Ridley is the wide receiver 71. My concern right now is at a 2, and let me tell you why it's at a 2 for both of these guys, because it's still young in the season. Alec has looked good to begin the year, and he could end up being the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Cam Ward clearly likes him. But Cam Ward's going to continue to grow. And as he grows throughout the season, maybe we see Calvin Ridley start to get some more targets and start to be looked at a little bit more often than Alec Iomanner is. For me personally, when I look at these guys, Calvin Ridley is not that far behind Ao. They're very, very similar in a lot of different statistical categories. Iomanner has just had the opportunity to score a couple of touchdowns at this point. So for me, I'm going to put it as a 2 because I think both of these guys could still end up being solid this season, and we've still got a lot of season left. We definitely love George Pickens this offseason. He's the wide receiver 26 in drafts. He's the wide receiver 19 right now. A slow week 1 kind of contributed to that, but with no CeeDee Lamb, he's probably going to see a lot of targets over the next couple of weeks. Because of that, I've got his concern at a 2. I preached Matthew Golden hard as a late round sleeper, but I am not giving up on him as of yet, because I'll tell you right now, for any of you that want to basically say, oh yeah, you missed on Matthew Golden, you know who's missed on Matthew Golden worse? It's Jordan Love. Because there have been 3 plays over the last 3 weeks where Jordan Love barely missed Matthew Golden. And I'm talking inches. And because of that, Matthew Golden doesn't have nearly the type of fantasy points that we would like. But just imagine for a second that Jordan Love connects with him on 2 of those 3. Let's say, not even all 3 of them. Those are 2 pretty significantly big touchdowns. All 3 of them would have been big touchdowns regardless. But if he only connects with them on 2, we are talking about a much different scenario here where Matthew Golden is a guy that's more along the lines of where he's currently being drafted instead of wide receiver 78. And with no Jordan Reed, there's an opportunity for Matthew Golden to get going, especially this week because it's such a solid matchup. I'm not giving up on Matthew Golden. Do I have him as a 3 right now? Absolutely. If he comes out and he plays well in week 4, he'll drop to a 2. But I'm not giving up on Matthew Golden. He's too talented. Him and Jordan Love will absolutely connect soon. And when they do, you'll be glad that you held on to him. Do I want to say I'm wrong on Drake London as of yet? No, I don't, because he started slow last season as well. Michael Penix is either going to get better or he's going to get benched. There's really no in between. Also, Drake London, kind of the same scenario as Matthew Golden. Drake London had a touchdown reception in week 1 that was called back when it really shouldn't have been. And had he caught that touchdown, we're also talking about Drake London vastly different right now than the current narrative of him being a bust to begin the season. Then in week 2, he was injured, so he was more of a decoy. Back to week 3, we saw the targets and the playing time tick back up because he's clearly healthy now, and hopefully into week 4, we can get him moving in the right direction. He started slow last year. I still think he's fine this year. Terry McLaurin was in the same must-have wide receiver video that Drake London was in, but I'm way more concerned about Terry McLaurin at this point. After a quad injury, he had to seek multiple medical opinions to determine whether or not he needed surgery. That's not good, and he's definitely looking doubtful this week in week 4, but if you were looking at surgery for your quad, how bad is it really, and are you only going to miss 1 week? That's why I'm very concerned at this point. And missing Jaden Daniels last week didn't really help Terry McLaurin all that much either. It was a slow start to begin the season, but now with the injury, we got to be really concerned about Terry McLaurin. Am I giving up as of yet? No, but I need some more clarification on how injured he is. I mean, Emeka Egbuka was talked about on this channel probably more than any other wide receiver this season if I had to guess. Drafted as the wide receiver 36. He's the wide receiver 10. I'm going to put his concern at a 2 right now. He's been fantastic to start the year. Mike Evans looks like he's going to miss this week. But when everybody's healthy and Chris Godwin is back, what does that look like for Emeka Egbuka? That's why I've got to put him at a 2 right now. We were big fans of Deebo Samuel all the way back at wide receiver 38 as well. We felt like Deebo and McLaurin would be just fine together, and Deebo's wide receiver 16 right now. With Terry McLaurin injured, Deebo Samuel is going to stay with a concern of 1 because I still think he's going to be utilized very well in this offense. Yeah, we were wrong about Puka Nacua. It wasn't that we didn't like Puka Nacua, it's that we were worried about Matthew Stafford's back because during the majority of the draft process, when people are drafting the most teams, that's when Matthew Stafford was missing time. And there was no clear indication on how bad the back issue may end up being. And then all of a sudden we get closer to the season, and it's like, oh, yep, he's going to be good to go. He starts, and he looks fine right now. That was the main concern. If Matthew Stafford had been healthy, we would not have been concerned about Puka Nacua. So if you listen to that, we apologize. But at the same time, too, if Matthew Stafford would have been missing, do you think Puka would have been putting up these numbers with Jimmy Garoppolo? Neither Jake or myself were super high on Courtland Sutton this offseason. I mentioned him in a couple of different videos. Jake had him in our draft guide in the bust section. But when you take a look at Courtland Sutton, drafted as the wide receiver 21, he is outperforming that a little bit right now at wide receiver 15. My concern is going to remain at a 2 for him because I still think we're going to see up and down performances. We're going to see good performances, and then we're going to go to like week 2 sometimes where Troy Franklin balls out and maybe Courtland Sutton doesn't see what he needs volume-wise either. Also, you got to keep in mind Evan Ingram being injured right now potentially changes the way Courtland Sutton is being targeted, and if he comes back and he's healthy, you got to wonder if that changes things at that point. Wan'Dale Robinson. This is a guy that you know Jake loves him some Wan'Dale Robinson. He was at wide receiver 70 being drafted. He's at wide receiver 17 right now. That is a heck of a return on your investment. He's at a 3 for me on the concern factor right now because I don't know what we're going to get from Jackson Dart. I love Jackson Dart. He was my QB2 throughout the entire process. I felt like this is a guy that has a ton of NFL talent, and now that he's out on the field, we're going to find out. I don't know if it's good or not for Wan'Dale Robinson as of yet. And with how shaky the New York Giants are as a whole, I'm going to put his concern at a 3. Cedric Tillman, one of my sleeper candidates in the draft guide, still a ton of big play potential. And so far, throughout the beginning of the season, he's wide receiver 35 after being drafted as wide receiver 66. Concern level, It's a 3 for me. We know Cleveland's going to run the football. They just don't look all that great right now, but they've got matchups coming up where Cedric Tillman absolutely could showcase that big playability once again. Jake absolutely nailed it on the head with both of these next two players, Brian Thomas Jr. and A.J. Brown. I was warm on both of them. I wasn't pushing for you to draft him, and I wasn't pushing for you not to draft him, but Jake was pretty adamant that he had concerns about both of these guys, and he did well with those calls. Brian Thomas Jr. drafted as the wide receiver 8. A.J. Brown drafted as the wide receiver 10. Brian Thomas Jr. right now is the wide receiver 51. A.J. Brown's the wide receiver 39. Now, the good thing about Brian Thomas Jr. is he's still seeing a ton of targets. He could clearly turn this thing around. A.J. Brown, he's up and down. He has been. He always has been. That's the way it's been. He has given you some consistent fantasy performances at times while in Philadelphia, but this year it feels like more than not, it could be a lot more up and down than what we would like in the past. A.J. Brown is still a 2 for me right now because I think he's clearly the number 1 target on this team when they're actually throwing the ball consistently. Brian Thomas Jr., his concern is at a 3 because Trevor Lawrence hates him. Let's move on to the tight end position. And this video is already taking a while, so we might move a little bit quicker at this point. Also, I feel like I'm letting it flow, and I'm going to get lightheaded here pretty soon. I don't want to do that. Evan Ingram, drafted as the tight end 8, tight end 53 right now. Concern is at a 2. He's been injured. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to wait till he comes back and gives us a couple of healthy weeks before I judge where he's at. Jake Ferguson, people were asking me over the offseason, Kyle, who is your Jake Ferguson of this year? I said it's Jake Ferguson because last year I really liked Jake Ferguson. Then he dealt with an injury. Then Dak Prescott dealt with an injury, and it just didn't come to fruition. So Kyle, who's your Jake Ferguson? Who do you really like this year? It was Jake Ferguson again. Drafted as the tight end 13, currently the tight end 6. Kyle Pitts, Jake really liked Kyle Pitts. Drafted as the tight end 16. He's the tight end 13 right now. He's getting a fair amount of targets, but this is what you drafted Kyle Pitts for. He's got a decent floor, just not a ton of upside. Colston Loveland, I'm a huge Michigan fan, but I tell you, you got to stay away from him. I did not see how he was going to fit into this game plan as a rookie, so his concern is a 4 for me. It should be a 1 because technically I'm not concerned at all because he's exactly what I thought he was going to be so far. Drafted at the tight end 12. He's the tight end 51. He is dealing with an injury right now, so we'll see when he's fully healthy. George Kittle for me, tight end 3. I mean, I had him listed as my tight end 1. Big week 1, gets injured. Now he's going to miss 4 weeks. Hopefully he comes back and he's healthy. He doesn't miss any more time. My concern for him is going to be a 2 moving forward just because of the potential for a re-aggravation. But hopefully he comes back and he's just fine. Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, if they just would have left these guys separate, it would have been fine. But together on the same team, they're going to have a lot of issues trying to stay relevant on a weekly basis, especially considering the fact that Calvin Austin and DK Metcalf seem to be the 1 and 2 right now, and even Jalen Warren's getting a lot of work. Their risk for me right now, their concern is a 3. And then Mason Taylor. Jake and I both really liked Mason Taylor, and I still think he has a lot of potential, but he could end up being one of those guys that really doesn't break out until year 2 or 3. I think it could break out right now if the Jets would just actually utilize him. My concern for him is a 3. There you go, Headliner Nation. I know I said my top 50 players, but there was a few extra in there when we added teammates and talked about them. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. We changed it up here on Saturday to talk about something a little bit different than nuclear and landmine players, because now through 3 weeks of the season, we do want to just give a look at some of those players and figure out whether or not you should be really concerned about them, or you should still be on board the way that we may or may not be. But still a lot of time left. Jake and I are always very transparent with our hits and our misses, and we will be with these guys once again at some point this year and even after the year. But for now, enjoy the rest of the season because there's a lot of time left for these guys to either turn it around, get worse, or definitely drop from the performance that they have right now. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, like button, subscribe, bell notifications, and leave a comment down below if there's a player you remember us talking a lot about this offseason and where we currently stand on them if we didn't include them in this video. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain.